In my league start recommendations for 3.19, I suggested 3 builds. Poison Scourge Arrow Pathfinder, which ultimately became Poisonous Concoction Pathfinder. That was my own league starter, and it was an excellent build. I'm also exploring the Poison Scourge Arrow angle, so get subscribed if you want to see that in the future. Then, Shield Crush Trickster, which I ended up playing and adapting as an Expedition build. And don't worry, it crushes Expedition with ease. Though, if you're going to do general mapping, or maybe kill bosses, I'd suggest something a little bit more similar to my initial League Start version, rather than my Expedition-specific version, which I ended up playing and going pretty greedy by scaling crit. Though of course, I'm going to go into all the details about how I built the character so that you can understand some of the mechanics behind why it works. And hopefully adapt from there in your own build in the future. Now that isn't to say that my version can't do maps. In fact, with Call of Steel, it maps pretty quickly. That isn't to say it can't kill bosses, though I didn't really do any uber bosses because it's honestly not that worth it to do uber bosses. For everything I did do though, it was no problem, including a lot of the Maven invitations. So I don't think that my version of a build is for everyone. In fact, I think for a lot of people, the League Start version is a much better place to go, where you can scale the damage as a non-crit precise technique build, you'll be a little bit tankier, and you'll deal with a simplified version of some of the mechanics. For now though, let's talk about what I was doing. Starting with the cheap uniques that I used to assemble the base of a build. This is Perseverance, along with Grace and Determination, Cerberus's Limb, and Crown of Eyes. Perseverance is great because it allows you to turn your defensive stats, evasion and armor, into damage stats, by giving attack damage per 200 of the lowest of these. If you're using both Grace and Determination, and taking a few nodes to enhance both armor and evasion on the tree, you'll end up with quite a lot of both. Furthermore, Cerberus's Limb gives you even more defenses. Whatever shield you use for Shield Crush, it's going to have a lot of either armor or evasion, and if you're going crit, a bit of energy shield. Cerberus's Limb gives you defensive stats based on the defensive stats of your shield. And because it has increased spell damage, when combined with Crown of Eyes, it gives another 105% attack damage or so. These are all very cheap uniques, and they form a strong core of a build. Now where I diverged from the League Start version is I added Divergent Shield Crush instead of Anomalous, I used the Seething Fury Jewel, and I added Emperor's Vigilance. Seething Fury gives you base crit and crit multiplier based on the energy shield on your shield. Emperor's Vigilance has around 1800 armor, which is a fairly large amount, and a massive 380 energy shield. This means I'm getting almost 5% base crit and around 150% crit multi. The crit multi gets even higher because Divergent Shield Crush gives roughly another 60% crit multi based on having the Emperor's Vigilance. However, the Emperor's Vigilance itself adds a lot of complications to the build, which is why I don't think most people should play this build. If you're going to play it, you'll need to know which damage over time effects are dangerous to you, and which boss abilities negate your ability to block. Because the Emperor's Vigilance says that you have Glancing Blows. This doubles your block chance, but some damage pierces your block. We fix this because we have high evasion with Ghost Dance. You'll get hit, block that hit, and while you do take damage, that damage is automatically applied to your energy shield, since Emperor's Vigilance says blocked damage cannot bypass energy shield. Therefore, it's applied, a Ghost Shroud pops, and your energy shield is instantly restored to full. The problem comes when you can't block a hit, because it says all unblocked damage from hits automatically bypasses energy shield. Now I have about 2800 energy shield, and 4000 life, so I'm at about 60% of my total strength against unblocked hits. If you don't know what can and can't be blocked, you might find yourself mysteriously dying, which could lead to a frustrating experience. It should be noted, none of these situations will occur in Expedition. So if you're building this character for an Expedition farmer, it's totally fine to go full crit and use Emperor's Vigilance. A question that I got quite a bit as I was playing the build is, why aren't you going cold conversion? The answer is quite simple. The damage is totally fine for Expedition without it, and going cold conversion would tax the defenses. I don't really want to be squishier and die more, when instead I could just farm my Expedition bosses and make more currency per hour, because I'm not dying and I'm still clearing just as quickly as I would be with a higher damage. Then of course, why Trickster instead of Champion? Because we're not just using armor. And we're not just using evasion. We're also using energy shield. It's pretty difficult to scale energy shield on a Champion. Instead, it's quite easy to scale energy shield on a Trickster. You get energy shield from an evasion chest, and you get evasion from an energy shield helmet. Now in my case, I'm not actually using an evasion chest, though I will talk about that in a little bit. Furthermore, Trickster has Polymath, which gives you a massive amount of recovery. I gain around 14% of my life and energy shield on each kill. So as I'm clearing a map or clearing an expedition, I'm pretty much never going to die, since I get so much back whenever I kill anything that I'm instantly healed to full as soon as I take damage. If you think that healing when you get knocked to low life and gaining adrenaline is good, don't worry, Polymath is way better, especially at 14%. And then finally, Trickster makes you unaffected by temporal chains, freeze, and chill, so you just don't have to deal with those annoying mechanics. The reason I'm not using an evasion chest is I wanted Skin of a Loyal. This is my concession to more damage. My Skin of a Loyal is corrupted with +2 AoE gem. Now, initially I had wanted an evasion chest, and I had wanted to use Energy Leech support. I was specifically using Kintsugi. And Energy Leech support honestly didn't feel very worth it because my leech rate was so low that I was rarely both leeching and at full energy shield, especially with Blood Rage and damage I'd take randomly. The reason I dropped Kintsugi is you quite often have to pick a remnant that says enemy hits can't be evaded. You're taking every hit, so you immediately lose your damage bonus. If you wanted to turn this into more of a boss killer and play a non-crit version, I still think that Kintsugi is a great choice, or a well-rolled rare with things like life, evasion, and energy shield. But since I was just doing expedition, I instead made a concession to damage. I get a lot of armor and evasion from Skin of a Loyal's 100% global defenses, which of course also scales my energy shield. And furthermore, because it gives +2 and +1 on the gem, a level 21 Shield Crush gets me to the level 24 breakpoint for the 6 to 8 added damage based on the armor of the shield. Now I know I've talked about a lot of unique items, but I do have one more to talk about, and that is All's Uprising. This is how I'm able to fit Grace, Determination, Tempest Shield, Herald of Purity, Blood and Sand, and War Banner. I thought about running Defiance Banner, but I didn't really feel like I needed it. If you don't think you can afford an Uprising, again, you can drop the Tempest Shield, and all the investment into block if you're not using Emperor's Vigilance. It's very important because, like I mentioned before, unblocked damage bypasses energy shield, so you want to be blocking as much as possible. For the rest of my slots, I was using rares. On my gloves, the Rage mod is very important because Rage on hit makes clearing feel much better. For the suffixes, go for things like attack speed, accuracy, spell suppression, life regeneration, or resistances. And the same on boots. Rings, again, try to get resistances and get intelligence on one of them. For a little bit more on the various items that I got and how I got them, I'm pretty sure the gloves came from Rog. I don't quite remember, but given that it's almost a 6x tier 1 item, it looks very much like what Rog would spit out. My boots, on the other hand, I do remember. I bought a base with the Spell Suppression, Lightning Res, and Chaos Res, and junk prefixes for quite cheap. I used an Eldritch and Null to open up a prefix, then I did Suffixes Can't Be Changed, Veiled Chaos until I got Move Speed. In this case, I got Move Speed and Move Speed if you haven't been hit recently. Maybe not perfect, but definitely good enough as it really feels good on bosses where you're not taking hits too often. From there, I just blocked something, unveiled, and crafted life. For the rings, I'm pretty sure I bought both of them, but they wouldn't be hard to craft with Rog. For this, it's just about getting as many resists as possible, and again, like I mentioned before, the intelligence. My rares really aren't all that special. I know I have a Warlord ring in one slot. I didn't really need that, it just happened to have an open prefix, so I slammed it. Look for Chaos Res, look for Ellie Res, look for Life, and look for an open prefix, because you really want non-channeling skills have -7 to total mana cost on one, if not both rings. 1's enough to get by without your mana feeling horrible, 2's where it feels really good, especially in combination with a Replica Conqueror's efficiency. On that note, mine's corrupted with 2% increased reservation efficiency of skills. That's what I needed to fit in all of these auras, which again is part of a reason why I don't advise copying this crit version of Shield Crush. Although it's not like the Replica Conqueror's efficiency is specifically the thing that has to be corrupted in this way. It just technically has to be any jewel. Finally, in terms of my Watcher's Eye, the most important stat is the reduced extra damage from crits while affected by Determination. I'm not using Clarity, so that's just kind of a dead mod, and while the spell suppression while affected by Grace is useful to me, it's not mandatory. You could get spell suppression on your gloves instead. So if you can only afford one mod, go for the Determination mod and be sure to take the Armor Mastery. Now that I've talked a bit about the gearing, I'm also going to get into a bit about how I played the character. Before I do though, I have a confession. There's no POB for the character I'm currently playing down in the description below. And this is by design. I've mentioned several times now, I don't think you should just blindly copy this build. Unfortunately, I know that if I put the POB down in the description, people would blindly copy the build without actually listening to anything I had to say in the video. Then they'd make sure to go to the comments and write a really angry comment about just how bad my build is because they copied it without understanding it, or at least attempted to and then likely failed. So to avoid that problem, the POB has been on screen right now. So now that you've been properly warned, and hopefully now that you have a better understanding of how it works, if you want to check it out for yourself, just write it down, import it into POB, and you should be good. And on that note, if you've learned anything today about mechanical synergies or how to build defensive layers in Path of Exile, be sure to leave a like. For more content, such as finding out about that Scourge Arrow Pathfinder, get subscribed, or check out one of the many video resources in the card right now. And before I get back to talking about my experiences with the build, a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. So I'm sure it's going to be asked, how did I level the build? And the answer is Chaos Slinger. I played a completely different build. You probably shouldn't copy it, but if you really want to, there's a video in the card. After that, I took it into Expedition. Initially, I was a non-crit version, and then I tried to experiment with different things. For example, at first I was using an Amethyst Flask, but I found a Diamond Flask fixed my crit much more efficiently. At first, I tried Spectral Shield Throw, and realized I hate the hitbox of Spectral Shield Throw. Some people love it, but personally, I just absolutely can't stand it. And from there, I brought it into Expedition, specifically about 40 Sun Expeditions and about 20 or so Scythe Expeditions. During that time, I made roughly 100 Divines. And oh boy, does this build crush Expedition. The one mod that you absolutely can't run is, of course, Phys-Immune. This build purely does physical damage, so if the enemies are immune to your only sorts of damage, it's not going to be a good time. Also, when you're under-geared, 100% chance to overwhelm Phys defense, hits can't be crits, hits can't be evaded, enemy hits are always crits, can all be bad depending on your stage of gearing. In my current stage, I don't really care about hits can't be evaded, and I don't really care about enemies always crit. Though I will avoid nasty combos like my own hits can't be crits if I'm fighting a boss, and I'll generally avoid giving enemies 100% overwhelm as it's the one mod that is still dangerous to me. Try to take these bad mods later on in a chain or double up. If enemies' hits can't be evaded, there's no reason not to take that same remnant 3 or 4 more times. Because the build has high armor, high evasion, high block, and good recovery on block, it's super tanky, especially once you cap your spell suppress to deal with things that bypass your evasion. The build's one weakness, however, are damage over time effects and unblockable abilities. Luckily, there are no unblockable abilities that I'm aware of when doing expeditions. There aren't in general mapping as well, but you'll find some in bossing, such as the Slam from Uber Shaper. The other problem being that this build is weak to dots, so the Ignite effect from Searing Exarch makes it really a rough time for this build. Yes, this build can kill the Exarch, but it's really about overwhelming it with gear, and I certainly wouldn't want to do this setup while under-geared. You'll probably have a bit better time if you remove the Blood Rage though. And if you grab something like a second Life Flask in place of a Diamond Flask, assuming you're going with a non-crit version. The non-crit version actually bosses a lot better because you lose the weakness to unblocked hits. You'll naturally just be a little bit squishier and a little bit lower damage to hits you could block, since you won't be scaling block as much, but unblocked hits will no longer bypass most of your defenses. The clear speed is enhanced by Call of Steel, both in Expedition and general mapping. And even though I wasn't using Berserk since I just ran out of socket space and felt it was a bit too greedy, the single target damage is very solid. I was able to take down even very tanky Expedition bosses, though again not being able to crit them was quite annoying, and I generally avoided that whenever I could. Hexproof was kind of a middle ground I was willing to accept. I'd lose Assassin's Mark, so I'd lose my Culling Strike, which is a significant damage loss, but I was still able to kill them in a decently good time. Then finally, the question is, should you play this? If you want to do Expedition, absolutely yes. It's an amazing Expedition build, and you'll be able to farm them very efficiently. If you want an all-round build that'll clear most of the content in the game pretty well, then again yes, but I'd probably advise the non-crit version that I've talked about several times before. If you want a boss killer, no, you shouldn't really play this. This isn't going to be the best boss killer. If you want to play this on a budget, the Precise Technique League Start version will have a POB down in the description below. Do not try to make a crit version of this on a budget. It will go badly. I very much do not advise nor endorse making a budget crit version of this build. Make sure you have, I'm going to just throw out a rough number here and say 30 Divines before trying to go crit. But don't hold me to that, prices change all the time. Back when I first played Cast on Crit Forbidden Right, I put it together for 7 Exalts. That was back in 3.16 by the way, when Aegis Aurora was 20 Chaos. 10 Chaos if you didn't need a well-rolled one. Now, I wouldn't really advise Cast on Crit Forbidden Right for under 200 Divines. So as time changes, so do prices. Do your own research, look up the items I'm wearing, try to find things that are analogous, If you think you can put it together for less, then that's great. But do be careful about things where if you sacrifice, it might feel terrible, such as losing a major aura, including Grace or Determination. And remember, defenses are your damage, so don't skimp on those either. You can use a Prismatic Eclipse in place of Cerberus' Limb if all you look at is damage. But if you factor in defenses, Cerberus' Limb far outshines Prismatic Eclipse, even with the Fortify Corruption, and even with using something like Awakened Melee Fizz. In terms of general playstyle, well, I played it pretty simply. Shield charge into a pack, smack him in the face a couple times, right-click for Call of Steel, and shield charge into the next pack. This works very well in Expedition, and this works very well in general mapping. If you want to fight a boss, just smack it in the face till it gets pretty low. If it had a bunch of friends around, Call of Steel to finish it off. If not, keep smacking it in the face till you cull it. This is pretty much how I deal with bosses as well. If they don't have any damage over time effects, then I pretty much just stand there and tank it, cause I can tank their hits. On the other hand, if they have damage over time, such as Shaper Pools, or such as Cirrus Puddles, you definitely want to move out of those. Dots are the weakness of the build. Though I do think an ideal chest to get around that problem would be if you had a swap to Kintsugi. A really good Kintsugi can give you the same +2/+1 on your Shield Crush, and because you'll take 35% less damage if you haven't been hit recently, you'll be way tankier against all of those damage over time effects, assuming the boss didn't just smack you in the face. If it did, time to get out of that stuff. And again, make sure to take off your Blood Rage if you're ever feeling squishy in a boss encounter. And so, that's my Shield Crush Trickster. During 3.15, Shield Crush was the best Expedition farmer I could make, and as it turns out, in 3.19, it's still a damn good Expedition farmer. Trickster brings a lot of interesting mechanics to the build, and I think allows you to leverage your defenses in a way we don't see too often. It leads to a build that feels super tanky, great to play, and overall, pretty fun. Though the playstyle might be a little more active than some people like. If you want a super tank that's a lot less active, look into Righteous Fire Inquisitor. Same level of tankiness, except you can kind of just stand there and do nothing while your enemies burn around you. But what do you think? Are you going to play some Shield Crush now? Or maybe you're going to leverage some of these mechanics in a completely different build? If so, let me know which one down in the comments below. A special thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members. Your support helps keep me independent and allows me to turn down things like sketchy mobile game sponsorships. You can do so for as low as $1 a month over on Patreon. Or, if you want to support me completely for free, then you can join the community by hopping into my Discord, link below. If you want more content, check out my second channel, 10 Gaming Thoughts. It's a place that I use to review games, ramble my way through video essays, and a lot more. Or of course, you can just click the suggested video in the card right now. I hope you learned something today, and maybe I'll see you again sometime soon.